We are just days away from a possible government shutdown. Republican leaders are racing against a Friday deadline to push a short-term spending bill through Congress. But some Democrats say that they will not vote to keep the government open without fixing DACA, the program which, of course, protects many undocumented immigrants who were brought here illegally as children. The president has maintained that a border wall must be included in any deal on DACA. But today, the Washington Post reports that Chief of Staff John Kelly said, and I'm quoting here, a concrete wall from sea to shining sea isn't going to happen. He also reportedly called some of the president's campaign remarks on immigration, quote, uninformed. Meanwhile, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders says the White House does want a DACA deal, despite the president having tweeted just days ago that he thinks the deal is probably dead. Sanders also said that Democrats would be blamed if the government were to shut down.
We'd still like to see a clean funding bill, a 2-year budget deal, but we do support the short-term CR, but we're going to continue moving forward in that process. The president certainly doesn't want to shut down, and if one happens, I think you only have one place to look, and that's to the Democrats, who are holding our military and our national security hostage by trying to push through other policies that have nothing to do with the budget. We would like to, again, get a budget deal done, a 2-year budget deal, a clean budget deal, and then focus on negotiations following that deal with finding a permanent solution to DACA and responsible immigration reform. We've said that many times before. Our position has not changed. Democrats either need to decide that they're going to come here to do their jobs and they're going to govern and they're going to put our national security ahead of their own personal political agendas, or they're not. It's really simple, and that's a decision you're going to have to ask the Democrats. What's more important, national security or political agendas? I can't answer that for you.
Steve Shepard, chief polling analyst for Politico, joins us now from Arlington, Virginia. Steve, I want to start off with that issue, talking about budget funding. Our Capitol Hill, or CBS Capitol Hill team found Senator Graham, who said that, well, I'm not going to vote for a CR. You're destroying the military. So Dems seem to be willing to increase military spending. Many Republicans are willing to have a DACA fix. And those who don't want to combine the two are just very naive. Where do you see this going?
Well, look, it's got to go somewhere in the next 48 to 72 hours. Otherwise, the government will shut down. Lindsey Graham has been trying for a long time to broker a deal between Democrats and Republicans. As you mentioned, he wants an increase in military spending. He's open to extending at the congressional level the DACA program. And he's trying to get a deal that achieves this Republican objective, this Democratic objective, and keeps the government open. And right now it seems like, though, there are some Republican forces that are standing in the way of that. Some Democratic forces that may be standing in the way of that, though, as was mentioned in the video, Republicans do control both chambers in Congress. They do need 9 Democratic votes in the Senate in order to get this through the Senate. And the other problem is the House of Representatives, where a block of conservative Republicans who generally vote against these kinds of continuing resolutions that don't impose strict reductions in federal spending, they can hold this process hostage a little bit too and require Republican leadership to get Democratic votes. And if those Democratic votes don't come, then they can't get a continuing resolution out of the House of Representatives either. So you have these sort of parallel processes between the House and Senate that have to resolve themselves in the next couple of days. Otherwise, we could have our first government shutdown since 2013. Yeah,
Steve, I know you look at polling very closely. What do you, when you sample the American public on this issue of a government shutdown and just getting stuff done, what do you see?
Well, voters oppose shutting down the government. They don't want either party, whether it's to remove caps on military spending or to make changes to the immigration laws. They don't particularly like when elected officials use the process of keeping the government open and funding the government in order to enact these sorts of other policy goals. That's not something they're fans of. The secondary question here is, whom would Americans blame if the government did shut down? When you talk to folks in both parties, I understand what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said from the White House podium, but when you talk to Republicans privately and you talk to Democrats, there is the sense among Republicans that they think they control the presidency, they control the House, they control the Senate, though they need Democratic votes in the Senate to get something like this passed. There is a sense that they would be blamed. And generally speaking, public opinion polling has showed that, that voters tend to blame the party in power.
Interesting. I want to ask you also, Steve, much focus on Steve Bannon, the issue of invoking executive privilege. Our Margaret Brennan was in the White House press briefing. They're asking about exactly what that scope would be. What do you make of this back and forth of what the White House is saying and what the Bannon camp is saying?
Well, look, it was sort of a whirlwind yesterday with Steve Bannon appearing before a congressional committee, but at the same time it was revealed that he'd been subpoenaed by the special counsel and by federal prosecutors. He was forced, while in the congressional hearing, he was served with a subpoena because leaders in both parties of that committee found him to be less than forthcoming in his responses. I think the White House, Steve Bannon is a bit of a rogue character. He can, you've seen some folks, the president himself has suggested that he's become unhinged since his dismissal from the White House. So, you wonder if there's some concern about what he might tell federal prosecutors. But right now, at least before this congressional committee, he did seem to be working in tandem with the White House and with President Trump's interests during these investigations. So we'll see where that goes when he's interviewed by federal prosecutors. We may not find out for quite some time thereafter. But look, he's a bit of a wild card.
Yeah.
He was a wild card politically in the White House, and he's a wild card in these investigations, too.
We heard Trey Gowdy, the Republican from South Carolina, say earlier today, I'm frustrated whenever people assert privileges that do not exist. I know this is an issue that's just come out in the past few days, but is there a sense of gauging how the public feels about this?
That's a good question. I think, certainly the public in general doesn't necessarily like when people sort of hide behind an executive privilege. The privilege he was asserting was during the transition before Donald Trump had been inaugurated as president, but after his election in that interim 2-month period. The public doesn't generally like when people hide behind these sorts of legal, some might call them loopholes, in order to avoid giving testimony. But look, this investigation for a lot of folks, especially on the side of both the committees that are conducting these closed hearings and the special counsel's office, which has been remarkably tight-lipped about its investigation so far, a lot of this is a bit of a black box for voters. We don't know a lot about what the intelligence committees in both chambers and what the special counsel, we don't know, we haven't heard what they've heard. We don't know a lot of what they know. And until then, what a lot of voters do is they substitute their own partisan inclinations. Voters who tend to like President Trump think the investigations are kind of a witch hunt and are unlikely to go anywhere and yield anything substantive. Voters who don't like President Trump are convinced that these investigations are going to blow open all the campaign's activities in 2016. Right now, until we know more, the voters just tend to really retreat into their own partisan camps when it comes to interpreting these things.
Oh, Stephen Shepard, you make a great point. There's so much we still don't know on this. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.